Hello, I am Sarah Lucas. If you like what you hear here, you can follow more book lists of mine on BiblioCommons, and you can do that by searching user NDPL_Sarah L. In this first episode of You Gotta Read This, I'll be talking about the books I've read in the beginning stages of my youth literature class, during which I was asked to create a reading plan for the semester. And part of my reading plan is to dedicate my commute to audiobooks that may be relevant to my job and to read self-selected books for at least an hour before bedtime. You'll see here that I'm beginning to execute this plan, as well as practicing that sharing and thinking about books aspect of being a wild reader. The audiobook that I finished and the one that I've listened to on my commute to work is called The Finnish Way: Finding Courage, Wellness, and Happiness Through the Power of Sisu. This is a piece of adult nonfiction by Katja Pantzer, and she is a freelance journalist who currently lives in Finland with her family. And in this book, she talks about her journey to discovering happiness by adopting the Finnish tradition of ice swimming. And she discovered this tradition after a long battle with depression and anxiety when she was a young professional. But the theme of this book revolves around the very loaded Finnish word sisu, which kind of translate to the English words courage, perseverance, and grit. And being someone who has become obsessed with the Nordic culture, especially with Finland, I thoroughly enjoyed this book. And I find that it applies to me right now in both my professional and personal life, because it's inspired me to be more thoughtful about my choices I make on a day-to-day basis. Things like actually leaving my desk in the middle of the day and eating lunch with my colleagues, or just going out and braving the cold to take a long walk when I need some exercise or a brain break. Book number 2 is my self-selected book that I read at bedtime. This one took me a long time to finish, but I do think I'll keep reading the rest of the books in this series as they come out. It's called Wind Rider, and it's book 3 in the Tales of a New World series, and it's by P.C. Cast, who's a pretty well-known young adult author. And what it does is it follows the dismantling of very different tribes of people and their journey to putting the pieces back together. And it takes place in the distant future after a catastrophic natural disaster wipes out what we now know as the United States. This isn't science fiction, though. It's a fantasy, and it touches on tough topics, though, that we experience, like racism, religious bigotry, rape, and our maltreatment of the planet. It is, however, a really wonderful story about overcoming those things and fighting for racial harmony. Also, if you love animals, especially horses like I do, you gotta read this. The third book I want to talk about is called The Lost Words, and it's written by Robert McFarlane and illustrated by Jackie Morris. This is a children's illustrated poetry book, but I think it's appropriate for all ages. And it's one that's been passed around our office quite a few times recently, and everyone only has wonderful things to say about it. One of the librarians, in fact, has a seven-year-old child that spends her mornings before school in our office, and she was actually the first to read it, and she described the language in this book as silvery and soft, and I couldn't have said it better myself. The premise of this book is that nature words are disappearing along with children's imaginations, and this is actually a book of spells that aims to reintroduce those things. Each page is filled with really beautiful illustrations and acrostic poems using words we encounter in nature, like wren or adder. And like I said, I think people of all ages will love this book, and when they open it, they'll just be taken away by all of the beautiful illustrations. And the fourth book I want to talk about is called Tiny Little Rocket, and it's by Richard Collingridge. This is a children's picture book, and this is one that I read aloud during our Things That Go story time. And it's a rhyming picture book about a rocket's journey through space. The story itself is very good, but I think it could stand alone with just the illustrations. They're fantastic and colorful. And even though, I was reading the words on the text, they were so small that I had to read the page up close and then show my audience the pictures afterwards. The tiny, tiny little words. So even though this is a really great read aloud, it takes a real talent to hold it up and show the pictures and read it at the same time. But the kids and the parents I was reading to thought that was funny. They thought it was funny to see me having to turn the page and turn it close to my face before I showed them the pictures. But I liked the way that Publishers Weekly reviewed this book. They said that it offers a superb sense of rhythm and pacing with strong appeal as a read aloud. And Collingridge's boldly colored illustrations hit at naturalism while retaining a comforting sense of whimsy. I thought that was really nice. And then the last book I wanted to talk about is one that I think I'm going to use in some way for my inquiry project. This book is called Crenshaw, and it's by Katherine Applegate, who is one of my favorite authors. She wrote The One and Only Ivan. And this one is about a little boy named Jackson and his imaginary friend named Crenshaw. Crenshaw is that big black cat that you see on the cover, and he talks. And even though Jackson's a little too old for an imaginary friend once the story starts, Crenshaw feels the need to return because Jackson's family is struggling with money and his life seems to be falling apart. And Crenshaw is there for him in his time of need. I think this book does a good job of gently exploring the topic of poverty and homelessness. And I think this would be a great one for book clubs or even programs. And for that reason, I've included a link to a teacher's guide that has some really great discussion questions and extension activities. And that's it for the books I wanted to review for my first You Gotta Read This. But I do want to leave you with the books that I have on deck. Now, like I said in my reading plan at the beginning of this video, I am trying to listen to an audiobook before work every day and on my way home from work. And that in some way applies to my professional life. So that one on your screen is Our Kids, The American Dream in Crisis by Robert D. Putnam. This one's been on my to-read list for a long, long time, but I think it's finally time for me to devote some time to it. I'm actually on the waiting list for this audiobook, so I hope it comes pretty soon. I might have to buy this one and not just get it from the library. I also want to read Winter Girls by Laurie Halse Anderson, the author of Speak. I remember reading Speak in high school, and that really impacted me a lot. In good and really sort of traumatizing ways. But Winter Girls is a book about eating disorders. So I think that will be relevant to my inquiry project in talking about trauma-sensitive techniques for helping and communicating with children and teens in the library. And then the other book I have on deck is called Wish Tree. And this is another book by Katherine Applegate, one I've not read. And I'm excited about reading because it's going to talk about racism and refugees. And I guess it's told from the perspective of this big red tree that can hear what everyone says to it. So I think that's a really interesting perspective for a story. So I'm really excited about getting started. Thanks for listening. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day.